Florida is failing. On the real estate side, new construction sites are being abandoned throughout the entirety of the state. Inside hospitals, garbage is overflowing. For lease signs are abundant, even in the downtowns of cities, as people perceive that the economic outlook for the state is dim. Once popular beach destinations today look like ghost towns and hurricane aftermaths. Tourism, the state's largest industry, is being boycotted by international travelers, and yet many of the state's residents continue completely blind to the destruction that's unfolding in the state right now. Today we're going to dive deeper into the catastrophic thing that is Florida's economy in 2025. We'll start off heading towards Bradenton, Florida, on the southern tip of Tampa Bay, a popular beach and tourist destination. Heavily impacted by Hurricane Milton and Helene last year, downtown Bradenton is seriously suffering. We were out and about in downtown during rush hour, looking at all the available real estate in downtown Bradenton. The abundance of rental properties for leases, particularly commercial, in the downtown Bradenton area is astonishing. It seems like on almost every single block there's vacancy. Beautiful may Bradenton be, there isn't a lot of demand for commercial real estate right now. I found it interesting that in the more historic neighborhoods, many of the historic areas were actually being, overbuilt with McMansions, and with so much space available now because of the hurricanes, many builders and developers are buying up these historic homes, knocking them down, and building practically McMansions in areas that previously were very historic and authentic neighborhoods. Downtown Bradenton has always been a rough area. And with today's economy, many of the restaurants and businesses that were once thriving today look like homeless camps. The Sarasota and Bradenton airport are eerily empty, and the city streets seem to go on for miles without a single vehicle, just the occasional homeless person here or there. Despite this being the worst off-season we've ever had, downtown traffic can be pretty aggravating, so I decided to come back at night where perhaps I could find more parking available and show you guys how much available real estate there is in downtown Bradenton. That's where I discovered this abandoned bank that I wanted to get some footage of, but when I pulled out back, I discovered that it had been taken over by the homeless, and they weren't too happy about our presence here. I noticed there were large rocks on the ground and knew very well what they were there for.
They're screaming.
You own this bank? Is this your bank, bro? You don't own this bank, bro. You don't own this bank, bro. You don't own this bank, bro. I know you ain't tough, bro. Yo, mama. Now, I was just out there trying to document all of the for leases and all of the abandoned buildings in downtown Bradenton. I had no idea that the homeless people that sleep here at night would trip up about me recording the buildings, but it became a huge problem. I noticed this huge for lease sign outside this bank, so when I pulled in the back, I figured I could drive around the back of the bank since there were tellers, but they had closed the back entrance, so once I drove back there, I had nowhere to go with my huge pickup truck, and, the homeless people got mad at me. I noticed there were rocks on the ground and pretty much understood that if I didn't get the crap out of there, the homeless people are going to start throwing rocks at my car. Now, I have nothing to gain by instigating an argument with people that live on the streets because I got a life and things to do, but I also knew that if I didn't show some toughness here, next thing I knew they're going to be throwing rocks at my car, so I had to be a little bit defensive just to get the crap up out of this parking lot. And that's the situation with commercial real estate in Bradenton. There's for lease signs everywhere. A lot of people have abandoned their businesses, knowing that with the amount of crime in this city, there's no money to be made. The homeless people are also notorious dumpster divers. Not exactly a hygienic practice. The businesses that do exist here have to contend with the homeless people coming at night and tearing up all the garbage bags and leaving all of the food debris on the ground. This is a serious health concern for the city of Bradenton. This is what the rear end of many restaurants and businesses look like in Bradenton, as the homeless people come at night, tearing apart bags, looking for something to eat, and leaving on the ground all of the food debris to rot in the day's heat. It's an absolute health concern. I was in Bradenton most of the day, and the amount of for lease signs that I saw on commercial real estate is astonishing. Part of the problem is also not just the hurricanes, but the recent changes in immigration laws. Whether it's hospitals, assisted living, or retirement homes, for the most part, undocumented people or people on temporary status made up a huge percentage of the labor force. Nurses, assistants, janitorial staff, anybody that has to do with the cleaning and maintenance of all these facilities, a lot of them were under temporary status that was revoked by the current administration. Florida is among the states that had the largest percentage of people under the protection of I-220A. Particularly, these individuals were having a work permit. That means that the U.S. government allowed them to work, and healthcare became one of the largest employers for individuals under this status. When their statuses were revoked by the current administration, hospitals saw a crisis. Many of these individuals were the maintenance crew, the cleanup crews for all these facilities. Suddenly, all the hospitals and nursing homes saw themselves without maintenance and cleanup people, deferring that obligation to nurses and other people who really didn't want to do it. I talked to somebody who had a recent hospital stay in Florida, and they had the garbage sitting there for 4 days until somebody finally complained and the nurses came and changed out the garbage. The issue is that right now we are at the bottom of the worst tourist season we've ever had, and very soon the state of Florida is going to be flooded with tourists and snowbirds. And when that happens, the hospitals are already at peak capacity. When it comes to the staff that helps keep these facilities clean, they're vastly understaffed, and pretty soon when the snowbirds arrive, these hospitals are going to see a major crisis, particularly with garbage, maintenance, and hygiene. There's already a crisis. What do you think is going to happen in these facilities when all the snowbirds arrived? There's a larger number of patients, but you don't have anybody to do any of the maintenance and cleaning. It's already a complete disaster. In Bradenton and Sarasota, when people stay at hospitals, they come home with a bed smell. The mattresses aren't being cleaned, they're not being kept up with, and the water and sweat and everything from the patients' beds leaks on the bottom, and it creates kind of like a sludge, and you lay on those hospital beds. You come home for 5 or 6 days before you can wipe that smell off your body. If they're having trouble getting the garbage out on a daily basis, what do you think is going to happen with deep cleaning and other types of hygienic things that have to be done at hospitals on a regular basis? Imagine the nightmare that's about to unfold when all the snowbirds come down here. Even now, in the absolute bottom of the tourist season, the worst season we've had in a while, I talked to somebody in Naples. They went to the hospital, to the emergency room, and they were actually there all night long and couldn't get into a room because the hospital was understaffed. They went home in very critical condition. So even right now, with almost nobody in the state of Florida, the hospitals are struggling. What do you think is going to happen during tourist season, during the peak of snowbird season, when everybody comes down here and these hospitals and facilities are completely understaffed? And already much of the staff at many of these hospitals are people who the state of Florida hired from other states. They're people who just recently moved to Florida. Florida has a new policy with law enforcement, education, anything that's public services, where they're only hiring people from other states, people who recently moved to the state. They don't want lifelong Floridians to have any of these jobs, whether it's in education, hospitals, law enforcement. We've even seen policies where they pay people for those jobs only if they're relocating to Florida. So if you're a Florida resident, you can't get a job with a law enforcement agency. Only somebody who lives in another state, relocating to Florida is allowed to apply and get these jobs. It's happening at hospitals. It's happening with many police departments. The idea is that the state of Florida only wants to give these jobs to people who live in other states who relocate to the state, which means that the people that are already in Florida from Florida don't have access to these jobs, because the hiring policy is that they're only allowed to hire people from other states because they're trying to continue bringing people to Florida. There's a lot of hospitals that are doing this practice here in Bradenton and Sarasota, and this is the only reason they've been able to keep staff in hospitals, is because the people are relocating from other states, and that they're hoping that in the future they're going to get a promotion to get paid more money. Little do they know the trap they've fallen for. These are people who came to Florida and hired as nurses, and when they show up to the hospital, they're having them do other stuff like janitorial or watching patients or doing things that isn't exactly their job description. So scope this out. They grab a student from Tennessee or Kentucky, promise them a job in healthcare in Florida, and when they show up here, instead of doing what they're supposed to do, they're like, yeah, we're actually going to have you doing this instead. It's not somebody that lives in Florida. It's somebody who moved to Florida for that job, and now that person's stuck in that situation. They couldn't convince somebody in Florida to do the same thing because they could just get up and find another job. That's in the medical field. Let's talk about education. This is Lee County, Florida. If you didn't know this, the state of Florida currently has the worst paid teachers and the worst paid law enforcement out of all 50 states. And that's a problem because the state of Florida now has the second highest cost of living. So imagine a state where on one end you have the highest cost of living, but you also have the worst paid teachers and police officers. What do you think is the result of that combination? Now, as per Florida law, the school boards don't have to release any type of information to the public. Man, we have tried to get information out of these school boards, and the answer is always the same: we don't have to give it to you. So let's go by our sources on the ground instead. One particular school in Lee County, Florida, as this school year goes, they have had 3 teachers in a row quit on a body of students. The students are now on their 4th teacher. The reason the teachers are quitting their jobs is because they're not getting paid enough in the state of Florida. Like I said, the state of Florida has the absolute worst paid teachers in the country. Lee County, which is the Fort Myers area, and Collier County, which is the Naples area, particularly have some of the worst paid teachers of anywhere in the state. Despite the cost of living in South Florida being extensive, they're not paying their teachers anything, and many of these teachers are quitting halfway through the school year, leaving the students to be getting shuffled around endlessly, like what's happening now in many schools in Lee County, Florida. Like I said, we're not going to get any official information on this because they're not required to give it to us. But in the comments section, if you got kids in Lee or Collier County schools, let me know how it's going for you. At the end of the day, the numbers speak for themselves. You have the worst paid teachers and the worst paid law enforcement in the country. So what do you think the results are going to be? In Lehigh Acres, Florida, new home construction hasn't ceased. And that's considering that on practically every other block, there's an abandoned construction site in some neighborhoods. Much of the new construction going into Lehigh Acres is seriously suffering from infrastructure. Most of the roads are barely paved. New houses do not have city sewage, they're on septic tanks, and there's no city water, so people have to have wells. Don't even get me started on internet servers. There's barely internet signal or phone signal out here to begin with. And this massive lack of infrastructure is where Florida's fastest growing communities were, and you're surprised why people have stopped buying. These are places that offer absolutely nothing. After all, Florida doesn't have a state income tax, so what do you think you're going to get for public services in a state that doesn't even have the bare minimum? Hopping back to Sarasota, tourism is how Florida subsidizes not having a state income tax. The hotels and restaurants generate revenue, which is used to subsidize you not having to pay a state income tax. The problem is that Florida's tourism has been suffering greatly. On a state level, some horrible decisions have been made and continue to be made, like the recent change of open carry in Florida. All this is going to contribute to people from within the United States not wanting to come to vacation in Florida. But on a federal level, an onslaught of changes have happened that have made Florida very unattractive to international tourists. And what it's done is that it's absolutely depleted the state's ability to continue refunding its projects and activities because tourism was funding that, and well, tourism doesn't exist. In fact, many of the places like this, iconic places that brought tourists to Florida, don't even exist anymore. Welcome to Cape Coral, Florida. This is an area outside of Fort Myers in Lee County. Cape Coral is an incorporated city, and it was a very popular destination for people relocating to Florida. New home construction here was among the fastest growing in the country, but they didn't create the proper infrastructure for all the new home construction, and it's resulted in one of the worst urban development disasters that has ever unfolded in the United States. They used to brag about having the largest canal system in the world, and well, it doubles in size every time it rains, as most of the streets flood, and a lot of the new home construction is done nothing more than just funnel more road water, leading to a situation where in areas there's been a lot of growth and development in Cape Coral, the streets literally flood every time it rains because, well, there's nowhere left for the water to go. It's created an absolute disaster. They're trying to build the houses above the floodplain, but that means that the roads are now below the floodplain, and every time it sprinkles, Cape Coral turns into an absolute river. While it isn't every single part of Cape Coral that has this problem, it's entire sections of the city that literally flood like this every time it rains. The situation in Cape Coral is just one of the many examples of the disaster that is growth and development in Florida, where entities continue to permit new home construction in areas that have literally no infrastructure. They don't have access to internet. They don't have roads that are up to any type of standards. These roads are outdated, they flood, there's no drainage in these areas. There's no city water for people to have access to water. They gotta drill wells. There's no city sewage. People have to get septic tanks, and then when it floods, many times those systems fail and that water gets contaminated with septic waste. This is the nightmare of growth and development in Cape Coral, Florida. As we enter downtown Fort Myers, the situation here is not any better. Many years back, downtown Fort Myers was noted for being lively and vibrant and a hip and trending place, but today, again, the people stopped moving here, the vibes are gone, and downtown Fort Myers, while it is boasting of somewhat of a gentrification or some more construction and new businesses going in, revitalizing after Hurricane Ian 3 years ago, some of the damage is irreversible. A lot of people are just simply afraid to invest here. The streets of Fort Myers were literally 2 feet underwater, which means that all of these businesses flooded. And thankfully, a lot of businesses came back to Fort Myers. But the ability of Florida's beach towns to recover and bounce back from hurricanes isn't guaranteed. Some places simply can't do it. And thankfully, Fort Myers does have more revitalization. There's still a lot of new buildings going in, new construction sites, but it's questionable whether overall this metropolitan area will continue to be what people thought it was going to be. For one, the city's roads simply manage to be packed all the time. Again, even now in the absolute worst off-season we've had in a while, navigating the streets of Fort Myers is an absolute nightmare. There are far too many people and simply not enough roads. Even on a rainy, crappy weekday in the off-season, getting across Fort Myers is an absolute nightmare. In the winter when snowbirds comes down, and then it turns into another hour and a half commute, making Fort Myers have among one of the highest commute times in the country, particularly during the winter, despite the fact, well, it's mostly empty. Just horrific urban development, allowing all this growth and new home construction to go on, but not having any infrastructure for it. A complete urban development disaster unfolding in Florida. Cities don't have beltways. Any new expressways or roads built in the state turn into toll roads that are so expensive that the locals simply can't afford it, which means in cities like Orlando, where there does exist expressways, people simply avoid them, pushing all of the traffic in the city streets that should have been on those expressways that people can't afford to be on. This is the nightmare of Florida's urban development, a complete disaster of mismanagement when it comes to infrastructure. A mismanagement manifested best by the notion that despite being completely barren and empty in many places, all you have to do is get on any of the major roadways to be stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic. Civil engineers simply must not be in the budget. This is the Greenbrier section of Lehigh Acres, Florida, outside of Fort Myers. New home construction continues to be abundant here, despite the fact that none of that infrastructure we've mentioned exists out here. This area is a nice country area. There was practically nothing out here 5 years ago, but the amount of new home construction going in out here is insane. And many of the new home construction is actually duplexes, which is mind-boggling considering the fact that there's plenty of affordable housing in closer areas. Why are you building duplexes in the absolute middle of nowhere? Now, Greenbrier, like I said, it's beautiful and country. It's a great place to live, but it's seriously lacking a lot of things. One of the craziest things about this area is that new home construction continues booming out here, despite the fact that there seem to be no buyers for it at the moment. In many of these remote parts of Lehigh Acres, people are starting to put metal bars on new construction. Simply leaving your home unattended in a place this isolated with this much lack of income and resources is like leaving bread out for the birds. Somebody's going to come and get it. One of the craziest things that you'll see in Lehigh Acres is new homes having metal bars put up. As soon as you build a house, you got to put metal bars. You got to put as many cameras as you can because people out here are desperate. These areas are known as food deserts. The only thing that's been built out here is new homes. There aren't gas stations. There aren't corner stores. Crap, there aren't even the famous Dollar Generals. There simply is nothing in these neighborhoods besides new home construction, and that simply isn't feasible. It creates food deserts, and the people that are stuck out here with no jobs and no opportunities, they get desperate, creating scary situations. This really is the pinnacle of car dependency in the United States. If you don't have transportation out here, you're absolutely nobody. So if you want to live in a city that has everything like a Raising Cane's, then you got to end up in Clearwater, Florida. Here they have everything. Low risk when it comes to hurricanes. They have city utilities. You have access to city drainage and city water and lots of great restaurants, good beaches and things to do. The problem with Clearwater Beach is then you have to pay an absolute premium. Rents in Clearwater, Florida are so high that even a YouTuber like myself can't afford a 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartment here. Clearwater, Fort Lauderdale, the communities that actually have infrastructure and good economic mobility in Florida are then so expensive that they're on par with places like California. If I could live in Clearwater, Florida, I definitely would consider this area. It literally has everything. Pinellas County is coastal, it's urban, it's safe, it's got lots of things to do. There's all types of restaurants. It's part of a huge metropolitan area. But then the cost of living here, renting, buying becomes so astronomical that it literally makes no sense. This is what people in Florida would want. A city that's safe, clean, has all types of restaurants, things to do, lots of utilities. It's basically a functioning city, but the cost is so high that most people can't afford it, including police officers and teachers. So what do the people that want to live in this metropolitan area have to do to survive? Well, they can't live here in the city. They end up with an absolute massive commute to places like Parrish, Lakewood Ranch, or Wesley Chapel, the far outskirts of the metropolitan area. Despite the well over an hour-long commute, these suburbs offer people like police officers and teachers an opportunity to own a home somewhere in the Tampa Bay area, with the catch, an absolutely far commute. And then, well, of course, the fact that these areas are also food deserts themselves. Parrish, Florida, in Manatee County last year was the fastest growing zip code in Florida and the 9th fastest growing zip code in the entirety of the United States. Why are so many people moving out here? Well, there's nothing in Parrish. Everybody that lives here is either commuting to St. Pete, Clearwater, Tampa, or Bradenton, Sarasota for work. There's nothing in Parrish that would bring you here other than the fact that new home construction is affordable. Teachers and police officers and just the middle class want to have a big giant home in the suburbs, and people here are finding that in Parrish they can buy that home if you don't mind an absolutely long commute, and of course to live in a food desert, a place where even getting food is a challenge. People who Uber drive in this area report that they don't even get a $1 tip. People here are literally cash strapped. Many of them decide to have food delivered because from Parrish to a restaurant and back is probably 30 minutes each way. So if they want to have something to eat, the best option is to have somebody deliver it to them, and then eventually they discover that the cost of having groceries and anything delivered to them starts to cost more than the cost of living in a city. Nonetheless, it's in places like Parrish, Florida, where people are still trying to find the Florida dream, only to discover the many inconveniences of the state, where cost of living doesn't seem to add up. And even here in Parrish, many of the places that people thought would be neighbors, single family homes, people are starting to shack up and roommate up and do whatever the crap they can. In these suburbs in Parrish, while they might look empty in the daytime, there's cars parked out on the road at night because there's so many people living in every single one of these homes, because the cost is becoming so high that even here in the suburbs, people simply can't afford it. A dream turned into a nightmare. The situation in Florida is as we have stated on today's video. And while many people say that I dramatize or exaggerate things, this is kind of exactly what's happening right now in Florida. There's still a few places like these suburbs in Parrish where people are able to reasonably buy a home that's affordable and live in the warm weather. I guess it's not so bad if you're retired, but I do know that the people that are trying to make this suburban life work with families are really having some serious struggles. I'm not sure why, but every time I Uber drive out here, the stories that I hear from people and their family situations, they're burnt out, they can't afford their homes, they can't afford their vehicles. They're in the backseat of an Uber because their car broke down and they don't have the money to fix it. They're going through a divorce. They're going through health problems. It seems like a lot of their health problems come from stress. Basically, even the most sustainable options like these Parrish suburbs are really not that sustainable. People don't really calculate in the long term the cost of living in Florida, and the dream becomes very quickly into a nightmare. A nightmare in the suburbs that quietly goes unnoticed. This is the reality of Florida right now. It wouldn't be a far stretch to say that the state of Florida has failed, and the most interesting aspect of it all is despite all the obvious signs are there for people to see how bad things are going, and people blindly believe that this is still a great place to live.